Have you ever felt like you're getting whiplash from environmental news? I mean, one minute we're hearing about a coming ice age, and the next it's all about a world on fire. It's confusing. So today, let's just dive right in and try to make some sense of this prediction paradox.
So this is the big question, isn't it? We hear these alarming timelines, these catastrophic forecasts all the time. But then the date rolls around and, well, the world is still here. So what is going on? Are the predictions just plain wrong? Or is there something more complicated at play here?
Okay, to get to the bottom of this, we've got to start by looking at what most of us see and hear, the public record. And one side of the argument, looking at decades of news reports, says there's a pretty long and very public history of predictions that just didn't happen.
What's so fascinating is how the big scare has changed over time. Seriously, look at this. In the 70s, it was all about global cooling. Then we moved on to running out of resources and acid rain. The 90s, the ozone layer was the big worry, and for the last couple of decades, it's been a laser focus on global warming. Each era really did have its own signature panic.
And the language used was intense. I mean, back around the very first Earth Day in 1970, you had a Harvard biologist saying civilization would literally end by the year 2000, tops. That really set a dramatic tone that, as we'll see, pops up again and again.
And believe it or not, it gets even more vivid. This one, from 1969, said everyone would disappear in a cloud of blue steam. I know it sounds wild, but it's a perfect example of just how sensational and extreme some of these public claims could be.
All right, let's jump forward to a more recent one that a lot of us might remember hearing. A quote from the year 2000 suggested that, because of climate change, snow would basically become a thing of the past. But, for a huge part of the world, winter and snow are still very much a thing.
And this is where the rubber really meets the road, looking at these super specific timestamp predictions. Take the Maldives. Back in 1988, a report gave the entire nation just 30 years before it was completely submerged. Well, that deadline was 2018. Not only is the Maldives still there, but it's actually building new luxury resorts right on the beach.
And here's another huge one, the Arctic. You might remember the widespread prediction around 2008 that the Arctic could be totally ice-free in the summer as early as 2013. Well, here we are, many years past that date, and while the sea ice has certainly shrunk, there are still millions of square miles of it up there.
And honestly, the list just keeps going. Global famines by 75, running out of essential minerals by 2000, Great Britain turning into Siberia, the glaciers in Glacier National Park vanishing by 2020. You start to see a clear pattern, a public record just filled with these dramatic forecasts that didn't come to pass.
Okay, so when you look at all of that, it is so easy to just throw your hands up and say, well, they're always wrong. It's easy to get skeptical. But is that the whole story? Are the splashy headlines we all remembered the same thing as the actual science?
And that brings us to the other side of the coin. This perspective argues that if you can just look past the media soundbites and actually dig into the scientific climate models themselves, a totally different story starts to emerge. One that's, well, surprisingly accurate.
Now this right here is the heart of the counterargument. A NASA study in 2020 went back and looked at climate models from as far back as the 1970s. And their conclusion was pretty stunning. They found that the models were, and I quote, pretty much bang on at predicting the overall warming trend we've actually seen happen.
So to get this, we need to understand what a climate model actually is. It's not a crystal ball. Think of it more like this. Scientists run tons of different models at the same time. They call them ensembles. The point isn't to get one single perfect forecast. The real goal is to see where all the different models tend to agree, which gives them a much stronger idea of what's most likely to happen.
A perfect real-world example of this is James Hansen's famous testimony to the U.S. Senate way back in 1988. People often say he got it wrong, but here's the thing. He didn't make just one prediction. He presented 3 completely different possible futures. 3 scenarios, based on what we humans decided to do with our emissions.
So what actually happened? Well, it turns out our real-world emissions over the next few decades followed his scenario B, the one for steady, consistent growth almost perfectly. And when you compare the temperature changes he predicted in that specific scenario to what really happened, wow, his model was impressively on the money.
And this right here, this gets to the very heart of the paradox. Just look at the difference between a catchy headline and a scientific forecast. The headline shouts, "Ice-free by 2013," because it's simple and scary.
The actual science says something more careful, like projections show a significant decline over decades. See the difference? One is about getting your attention, the other is about explaining probabilities.
So why do we all seem to remember the wild predictions that went bust? Well, there are a few reasons. For one, a news story in 2024 saying a prediction from 1988 was wrong just isn't very exciting. Psychologically, it's also just easier for us to dismiss things that scare us. And, really importantly, sometimes the most extreme, absolute worst-case scenario is presented as the one and only prediction, and that's just misleading.
All right, so we have these two narratives that seem to completely contradict each other. One says the predictions are junk, the other says they're actually pretty good. How in the world do we put those two things together to understand our actual shared reality?
It really just boils down to this. The public record, the stuff we see in headlines, is full of these very specific, very dramatic, and yep, often wrong predictions. And that has, understandably, made a lot of people skeptical. But the scientific record, the actual models, show that the forecasts for general, long-term warming trends have been remarkably reliable.
And that, right there, is the key. That's the one thing to take away from all of this. The most important skill we can have is learning to spot the difference. Am I reading a sensational soundbite designed to grab my eyeballs? Or am I looking at a careful scientific projection that's trying to show me a range of possibilities?
So, the next time you see one of those dire predictions with a hard date attached to it, just ask yourself that simple question. Is this a headline or is this a hypothesis? Because learning to tell the difference isn't just about making sense of the past. It's probably the most important tool we have for figuring out the future.